te rangi e tū nei, tui a te papa e takoto nei, tui a te kaupapa e pai nei. Hoki mai rā ki tēnei te terenga tuarua o Under the Whāriki. Ko te ātākura Charlene Pewhairangi, taku ingoa.
Tēnā tātou e te iwi, ko tahu olosa hau. Tō māua, tō mātou waimaria hoki i te rangi nei, ko tai mai he roia, he wahine, he coastie.
That's right.
Ka ora he hoa. Nau mai, ko wai koe, no hea koe.
Kia ora, ko Riana te Ngahue tōku ingoa no Ngāti Paru ahau, he roia ahau.
Nā hui.
Tēnā koe, piri mai rā ki tēnei tātātou kaupapa. And today we're going to talk about politics. Paru politics as
Paru
well.
politics.
Paru politics. I've got a question line. Ko te pātai tuatahi ki a koe. Talk to us about your mahi. What made you become a lawyer?
To be honest, I just had a teacher in high school tell me that I couldn't be a lawyer. And so I said, yes, I can. And I pretty much did it out of spite. And then I got 3 years into the degree and I was like, oh, it's too late to back out now. So yeah, and then I did law school and then I went to commercial law firms. And so I worked in a commercial law firm for 4 years. And then now I've left to go to like a kaupapa Māori law firm that's focused more on treaty stuff. And yeah.
How does it feel like? How do you keep your emotions out of dealing with something like whenua?
Oh, I found it really hard. I did some mahi at community law a couple of years ago, and like there was a kuia who'd come in and she needed help with proxy. She didn't know what proxy was, and proxy is just nominating someone to vote on your behalf. And she was really stressed out because the land block that she was working for had sent her like 6 different forms to fill out. And only one of them was relevant, but she thought she had to do them all. And I was real pody actually helping this kuia because she missed the deadline to get her pakeke grant. And yeah, so I guess I probably don't have a good answer for that, is that I still do find it quite emotional, a lot of that stuff. Even the stuff that's not as heavy as like confiscation of land, I still...
How important is it to have Māori lawyers?
Really important, I think, especially when dealing with things like Māori land and also whānau, family law. I haven't worked in family law myself, but I have friends that do, and I know that they make a really big difference just in terms of having relatability and cultural understanding for different whānau Māori that are going through the system, because court can be so overwhelming for a lot of whānau. Like another Māori land thing I did a few years ago was I sat and watched a hearing for a Māori land succession, and there was like a couple of siblings there, but they were in their probably 70s, and the way that the judge was speaking was so confusing that I could see how overwhelmed these korowai and kuia were. And I just felt so frustrated sitting there saying, why is the judge speaking in a way that they must know that these people are finding it hard to follow, but they just didn't seem to care. And yeah, I just found it really frustrating.
Kua hautorongo, you've become pretty popular on our Pai Pāpaho Pāpore, e mihi ana ki a koe me ngā mahi. Talk to us about the videos you've been making. You're all over TikTok, you're all over Instagram. What was the inspiration behind your videos?
So I started making my yapping videos maybe in the middle of last year, and the driver for me was actually the oranga tamariki stuff with the removal of Section 7AA. So Section 7AA was a section in the Oranga Tamariki Act that was all about improving outcomes for Māori children, who are the majority. Māori children make up nearly 70% of the kids that are getting looked after in Oranga Tamariki, which is crazy because Māori kids are only about 20% of the population. So statistically, it's out the gate how many Māori kids are in care. And it was the National Party actually that did a big research into what are some solutions to help Māori kids. In about 2017, they had an expert panel and everything, and the panel gave a bunch of things saying this will, over time, improve outcomes. So the National Party put Section 7AA in on the basis of that expert report, and it had only been in since 2019, so it was only in for a couple of years, but it was already improving outcomes. And then the ACT Party just decided to take it out, basically just because it referenced being Māori. And the Māori Party slogan at the time was hands off our mokopuna, and people were really racked up about the kaupapa. And I could see in the comments there were lots of people saying that they're changing the law to take Māori babies out of Pākehā out of Māori homes and put them with Pākehā, and that wasn't quite what the section did. And so I was getting a little bit just concerned that people were getting racked up in a way that wasn't quite what the law was going for. And so I just made a video explaining it, and then lots of people were just saying thanks for explaining it, and then asking me to do other kaupapa, and I kind of just snowballed from there. And then the Treaty Principles Bill came out, and that was basically the same thing, where because it had been worded so craftily to be really hard to argue against, I could see lots of people couldn't explain exactly what was wrong with the bill, because it is really hard to do.
Paru politics.
Yeah, Paru politics, so I just gave it a whack.
Yeah.
And then, didn't expect that many people to care, to be honest. Because when I started making those videos, I was only really making them for people who are kind of on the brink of caring. Like that's the kind of goal I've always had, is if like a couple of people who kind of want to care, but they don't have the time, or they are not going to bother to actually go read all the academic articles about it. I just wanted to give a little, like enough information for someone to go, oh yeah, okay, I care about that kind of thing.
So it was out of information you wanted to join the platform to be able to share information?
Yeah.
Well, speaking about information, there's always misinformation with that. We wanted to touch on what's some of the things that as Māori we're often misinformed with in terms of politics?
For politics as a whole, I think as probably a general overarching kaupapa, is when I was growing up, I always thought politics was National versus Labour, so it was business people versus working people. But the more I've learnt about politics, it's actually more about really rich people versus everyone else. And when you get into what the different parties do, you can see that lots of the issues that get splashed all over the news and social media are actually just distractions. And at the end of the day, it's all about tax and all about moving money, which can be really hard to follow and is intentionally like that. They'd love for people to not look into it and not understand how tax works and not understand how the money flows out of government and stuff. Because if nobody knows about it, then nobody can get upset when they take it away from oranga tamariki and give tax cuts to landlords. So that's what I've really realised recently, is that it's actually about the super rich versus everyone else.
Yeah. And I mean, just on behalf of all of the rangatahi Māori in Aotearoa, e mihi ana ki a koe i o kiriata, because there's, you know, we're not all lawyers, and as you've said, we don't actually have time to unpack what it is that the political parties are doing.
With like the Treaty Principle Bill, that's a massive kaupapa of this year with our hikoi. What would be some things that would happen, like predicted by you? Obviously, they're all just predictions at the moment. But how would it change our society today if it did go through?
So that requires a little bit of context, like background context. So basically, we know that the treaty guaranteed tino rangatiratanga, and that's not up for debate. It's been proven in the Waitangi Tribunal and courts. Basically, the Crown said, we're not going to do that because that just gives Māori heaps of rights, and the Crown doesn't want to hand over any power. So they said, as a compromise, we'll give you the principles. And basically, they pretended like the English version of the treaty is equally as valid as the Māori version of the treaty. And so they said, here, we'll find a middle ground, and then you can use these in the law. So the principles of the treaty are the only things that have been given any bite in the law. Like lots of acts say people who use this act and enforce it have to do it in compliance with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. It doesn't say in compliance with Te Tiriti o Waitangi or even the Treaty of Waitangi. It's all about the principles. So, and the principles shouldn't be controversial if you're fair and reasonable, because it's already a compromise. So they're like partnership, protection, good faith, equity, redress. Like, they're things that are really common sense if you actually look into what happened after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. And so basically what the ACT Party is trying to do is take the bite out of the principles. So he's saying, we're not taking the principles away, we're just clarifying them. But he's made the principles have absolutely no legal bite. His ones that he's put in the bill are New Zealand government gets to do whatever it wants. Māori have the rights that they had in 1840, which he's interpreted to mean in today's world means pretty much nothing. And then Māori get equal rights as British citizens, but that one was never debated. Like, but Māori still didn't even get equal rights. So that's already below not meeting the threshold, you know. And so if the bill were to pass, basically the gist is that all the bite from the principles gets taken out of where it's already in the law. But he's kind of like triple streaming it. So he's got the treaty principles bill going forward as almost like a big distraction, and then it's
pushing the
regulatory standards bill, which is another huge kaupapa, and then the third stream is that they're already taking sections of acts that refer to the principles of the treaty out. So it's kind of like a three-pronged approach.
It seems like kind of tactical, like, you know, like lead the Marys this way. Hey, everybody look over here, treaty principle bill, hello, regulations. I'll just put this over here. Like,
100%.
and 100,000 of you showed up to fight against this bill, while in the meantime I'm in my office doing a whole separate
the regulatory standards bill. And 100%, bro, that's exactly right, because the regulatory standards bill has already been to Parliament a couple of times and didn't go through because it's an out-the-gate bill. It basically, it's been described by some of the experts as putting the New Zealand government in a straitjacket in terms of the types of law that it can make, because it has to follow a certain set of principles, which the ACT Party has gotten to choose. And the National Party and the Coalition Agreement has said they're going to push this bill through. So the bill's going through anyway. And so now it's just up to us to submit on the bill to decide what those principles are, because the ACT Party would like them to go through with no reference to the treaty and no reference to the Bill of Rights or any kind of collective rights, which is scary. It's really scary.
It's like we've literally been shown the right and given the left. Shown the right.
I think something that has come out of this kaupapa is the hikoi. What are your views on the hikoi, on the activation of coming together of Māori? What has come from that?
One thing I thought about a lot during the hikoi was the Māori that weren't on the kaupapa and don't necessarily understand why Māori are marching. And just ka nui taku aroha ki tērā hunga. Because I think a lot of that comes down to not really feeling or understanding the beauty of being Māori. So not wanting to go out and march in the streets for treaty rights because you feel like, what's the point? What does that get me?
And what does it get you? Why should we be marching for those that didn't come on the hikoi? How do we make them feel included or feel like they're a part of this kaupapa that's going towards tino rangatiratanga and mana motuhake?
That's a really good pātai. I think the issue for a lot of Māori, not all, but is disconnection and not understanding the power and the beauty of whakapapa and te reo and tikanga and all of those kind of things, and that's really hard to convince someone is worthwhile, because for me, I didn't grow up speaking te reo or anything like that, hadn't been to my marae until I was older, and when you're like that and you don't know what it's like to speak te reo and you go to pōhiri and you don't understand a single word that's being said, it's very isolating and really and like I always just think about that momo that I was, where it's like you don't understand what's going on, you don't understand what the big deal is, and because you don't feel included, you just sit back and leave it. And it's really hard for people like the Māori Party, say, to target that group, because a lot of it's really personal. You know, it's a personal journey of reconnecting and finding the value in being Māori and the beauty in being Māori. But I guess it's hard to convince people to care.
It is, and it's, you know what, it's even harder to convince them to care twice. That's what, I go back to that legislation bill. Like, they've pushed us, everybody's got up to do this petition, and 200,000 odd petition, but I doubt we'll do it again for regulatories.
Yeah.
Hey, like, we won't be there, we won't show up if it doesn't say Māori on it. But we don't understand that that's literally the thing that is going to affect us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I think, speaking to that, you know, we were talking about our there's people that weren't part of the hikoi, and for someone like me, I don't use my platform as an activist platform. I during the bill, I put the, what's it called? Petition thing on there, so that people can go into the bio, click on my bio, and go straight there. And I have a good following, and people, that's the only other thing that's there, you know, because I follow 2 people. It's me and my wife on
Nice.
the mish. Yeah, that's literally just that. Yeah, and so I had that, but that's all the mahi I really did for that treaty principle bill. And it's because I think from ki tōku taha, he hikoi o te mana motuake ia te rā. Whakaatu au I tōku mana motuake ki runga I tōku, I roto I oku kiriata. You know, like, I go out and catch my own kai.
Kia ora.
Living in tōku waka, I runga I tēnei whenua. I stay with whānau at different whare. I go to their marae, whakatau ki reira. You know, last year I got to go around the whole motu, all year. Like, that's all I did. And I got to stay with whānau. I got to take rama, akoranga from them and leave rama there. The coolest thing about that haerenga now, actually, thinking about it, is that I can mihi to their whenua. Because it's Jackie me in my time. And that's another example of how to be an activist without having to say, fuck the Pākehā. You know? It's like, I'm literally saying, fuck you, or I do what I want anyway. National mai, Labour mai, it don't matter. I'll be out there fishing and diving, he's not changing it. My Te Me Para still stands in Rātana. You know, no matter what the treaty principle does. That's where it's even harder to care. You know, because I'm sweet. Why can't you all be sweet? Sort your shit out, whānau. You know, that's another hard thing.
Hard out, no, I agree. And that's exactly the point, I think, is that it's really hard to ask somebody to care about something that doesn't affect them. And that's why, like, when I made my TikToks and stuff, I also made them for Pākehā, because I don't believe that most New Zealanders are racist, because I have heaps of cool Pākehā friends. I just genuinely think that they're totally unaffected. And so they don't think about it. They don't hate Māori. They don't want to see the treaty burnt, you know, but it just doesn't affect them. So why would they go out of their way to educate themselves on something? And that's like, for me, everything comes back to the oranga tamariki stuff. I genuinely believe that everyone, if you're a normal, good person, that you would want vulnerable children to be looked after. And so the fact that the government is able to snake oranga tamariki, cut half their staff, cut their funding, let them run on bare bones skeleton of what they need, and then give tax cuts to landlords, I find that evil. And I think that if all New Zealanders actually knew that that's what's happening, that everyone would be, nah, you're not doing that ACT Party, you're not doing that National Party, regardless of who's in. I think that if everyone actually understood how the flow of money worked from government, politics would look way different. But it's hard to ask people to care about kids in oranga tamariki if they don't know anybody that's ever been caught up in the system or anything like that.
It's a hard feeling, like, what am I going to do?
Yeah. And I think you've raised a really important point in that a lot of our whānau are affected by what the government is doing and has done to us. But I think what you've been able to do is create content and resources for our whānau to see at a political level what that looks like and how that affects our whānau. I think that's really, really important because, you know, you've touched on, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't. But it does affect our whānau on so many different scales. You know, I'm talking about our language, our culture. You know, just you being able to go out and catch your own kaibro. There's not many out there doing that. You know, so there's been so many things that have been stripped away from us, and I think it comes down to a dodgy government. You know, you know, you've touched on Oranga Tamariki Act. We've touched on the Treaty Principles Bill. What else is the government doing that we need to be aware of, or we need to start educating ourselves on to ensure that, you know, we're not marching again, that we're not fighting again for kaupapa that doesn't need to be discussed, or things that we don't need to be fighting for?
Yeah. I think a big one for 2025 is going to be Māori wards, because our local elections are going to come up. So basically we have central government, which is like Wellington and is the big overarching government, and then we have local governments, which are all of the individual towns, councils, like Gisborne District Council, Whanganui District Council, and Māori wards are like an extra seat that sits on those councils that's supposed to make sure that the iwi of the region has representation on the local council. And basically what the ACT Party did last year was make all of those Māori wards come up for a referendum. So every individual council that did a certain thing last year will have to put it to a vote of their ratepayers and residents. So people that live in the region will have to vote. Do we want an extra seat for iwi representation or nah? And so I feel like people are going to be really exhausted by the time that stuff comes up, to get people really racked up to campaign and get people to vote and understand what Māori wards are. So, yeah, I think that's just one big thing that's going to be coming up.
That's funny. We talked about it prior to, but that people being misinterpreting Māori wards as Māori wardens.
Yeah. Yeah, I got some comments on TikTok of someone saying that because I made a video about Māori wards last year, and someone commented, Māori wards are just glorified security guards anyway. And I realised that they thought they were Māori wardens. And then another comment I got...
And they're not even glorified. Like, they literally have to do the...
I know, they get the...
Māori wardens are the best.
Appreciate
They're
them,
the
man.
best.
And then another comment I got was Māori shouldn't have special areas in hospitals anyway, and they thought it was a hospital
ward.
Yeah,
right.
But that just made me realise that the word ward itself is
putting people off.
It's putting people off, and it's a confusing legal term.
Why don't they just call them Māori council seat?
Māori councillor or something like that. Just anything that's a bit less confusing or crossover with other things.
I've got a term here, political participation. What is that?
Political participation to me is just literally getting racked up over some kind of issue. But how it looks like actually in action is so different for different people. Like for some people it looks like leading a hikoi to Parliament, you know, and for other people it might look like signing the petition. For others it might look like looking into an issue, and that's kind of what I think is a really important one, is actually figuring out what's wrong with this. And then even if you figure it out, you can still decide whether or not you care enough to do something about it. But to me, it's really important to understand what's actually wrong with it. Why are people upset over it? Why is this going through Parliament? And if you understand it and then you still go, I still don't care enough to do something, that's all good to me.
That's sweet.
I'm like, that's all right, because not everyone gets racked up over every issue. But yeah. And then, you know, other people, it might be like sending your kids to kura kaupapa, to making sure that they're, you know, whakapono ki te hua o te Māoritanga, you know, that kind of thing. For me, what gets me racked up is oranga tamariki and prison reform. Those are my two things that I could be firing on any day. But I also know that people get racked up over different things. And like for someone it might be...
Housing.
Housing. For another person, might be employment protections. One point I wanted to make was the Regulatory Standards Bill. Can I go to that?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So just talking about employment, getting racked up over employment stuff, I was thinking about it on the way here, and employment law is a really good example of how the Regulatory Standards Bill could affect everyone. So the ACT Party, the gist of their party is that they want to promote individual and property rights. So their ideology or their overarching whakaaro is that the government and the laws should not infringe on my rights. I should get to do whatever I want and the government shouldn't be allowed to tell me what to do. That's basically the gist of what they go for. And so the Regulatory Standards Board is about putting that whakaaro all the way through all of the laws ever.
All the law.
And an example of where that might come into play is if you own a business in New Zealand and you have an employee that you don't like or you just don't think they're doing a good job, you can't just fire them. There's a process that you have to follow. And that's a regulation. That process that you have to follow to fire someone is a regulation.
Right.
That's a protection for employees. And so in America, in the United States, people can fire you on the spot. They can just say you're fired, you're gone.
Fired.
Wow.
Yeah, like Donald Trump in The Apprentice. But that's because their employment laws are super, what they call deregulated. So they don't have protections in the same way that we have protections and Canada has protections and the UK has protections. So regulations in lots of ways are protections. So in the employment space, that's one example of what the Regulatory Standards Bill could affect. Because as a business owner, you might want your individual right to let you just flick off employees. Oh no, they're not doing a good enough job, bye. But it comes down to whether or not we as a country believe that people should be protected or whether individual rights should be protected more. And that's kind of where a lot of the political clashes come from, is those two whakaaro.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's crazy stuff.
It's
bro.
crazy, but also like real boring. Like
Yeah. It is.
it's like real boring until you get into the actual nitty-gritty of it, but it's
Yeah.
hard to get into the nitty-gritty when it's so boring.
Yeah, and that's why we have amazing people like you doing all that.
That's a good
for us.
kupu aki ki ngā tangata e mātaki ana regulations, use it as a kupu taurite ana ki protection.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, I like that.
Because that's what it is for us. It's protection. And would it even carry over to like consumer stuff where like they wouldn't have to give you refunds? They wouldn't have to, like, is it? Because
That's a good
is it just?
Well, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
I'd have to look into it.
No, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a
That's
good
what I
part,
thought
though.
about. Yeah, because, to put it in perspective for our Māori, how will it affect them? Not everyone's business owners, eh? Yeah.
Well,
Like, it freaked me out because I'm a business owner. But when you're just saying, I was like, oh my God, that is crazy.
That's
Like another example of regulations is forestry. There's regulations or rules that have been put on forestry companies as a way to protect the environment. But under ACT's like overarching vibe, the environment doesn't matter because that's not an individual right. It's all about your individual rights. Why would you get to infringe on my individual rights just to protect the environment? It's not about the environment, it's about me. That's basically, that's what it's about.
It's a real, he mea ua mo tātou te Māori, eh? Nā te mea horekau he kupu mo te ownership i te reo Māori, eh? He kaitiaki ke. And we really struggle with that concept, even with, in terms of our whakapono, ko te taiao, kei reira he atua. He atua ki a mātou. And we have to manaaki, we're atua, me whakanui e era atua. But to them, those atua are there to serve them, to make houses, to make puta, to make money, to cull their fish.
Yeah, and even e hara I te atua he rawa ke.
He rawa.
Tarata siro.
He rauemi, Yeah.
Nā, mihi ana ki a koe, mihi ana ki ngā kōrero ko puta i a koe. Mō tēnei kaupapa.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
Hoki rā. Koutou, e hunga mātaki. Thank you for watching. Love you all. See you next time.